if you just do the math, it's just not going to happen with these single family homes, which is contrary to what you hear a lot from the mom and pop investors and a lot of the people trying to sell you all these single family homes. And then at that time, I started to network with higher level investors, and this is exactly what they were saying too. And I'm like, well, shoot, like, what do we do then?
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. Hello and welcome to episode 122. By day, Lane Kawaoka is a Department of Transportation engineer living in Hawaii. But Lane is also the co-owner of MPFE Investment, specializing in multifamily value-add apartments. Lane co-owns 626 units, and he's raised around $2 million from private investors. He also hosts the podcast, Simple Passive Cash Flow, where he discusses syndications, buy and hold investing, and turnkey rental real estate. Lane, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on the show from Hawaii here. I know there's a 4-hour difference, so it's 5:30 in the morning your time.
Yeah, it is the only time we can make it happen because I've got to go to the day job here in a couple hours.
I think it's great that you're working full time. You've got the day job, but it looks like you're just full bore into real estate on the side. And that's kind of where I want to start is just as a working professional, how did you even find the time or the interest in real estate?
I think for me, it was just like the money and just the clear path forward that I wasn't going to have to work at this job for 30 or 40 years was the motivation behind it. And then, I mean, it just comes down to everybody has a couple hours a day to do whatever they want. It's either you're going to pick up a book or you're going to watch Netflix, and it comes down to these simple decisions every day. And I just decided to work on this real estate stuff.
Talk about that decision. How does that translate into your day-to-day activities? I mean, do you watch any television? Do you watch sports on the weekend, or are you just whenever you're not working, you're looking for the next deal?
I've kind of made it into a sort of a life. I mean, I do a podcast and the website, so that kind of consumes a lot of my time. So I don't really watch TV anymore. I like sports. I don't really watch football anymore. I like basketball, but a lot of that stuff got cut out, and it's stuff I'm opting in for. I'd rather not take a few seasons off now and be able to watch it whenever I want, in the next few years.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you're well on your way. Let's talk about how you got into investing in the first place. It sounds like you started while you were living in Seattle.
Yeah, so I graduated college maybe about 10 years ago. Always following that linear path of going to go to college, get a good job, study hard, get that job to get a primary residence, and just save forever till you retire. And, I was kind of playing my role for a while there. And I had a pretty good job. I graduated in 2007 and working through the recession and just counting my lucky stars that I had a job at that time. And I was able to save enough money for a down payment on a $350,000 Class A home that I rented for $2,200. And I got on that escalator of home ownership that everybody talks about. But at the time, I was traveling all the time because, the good thing about this good job was that I got paid. But the bad thing, there's always a bad thing, is that I was traveling all the time. So I was able to, only there on Saturday. So I realized, like, shoot, this is like not making any sense at all. So I'm just going to rent it out. And I didn't have any experience. I just called up an old landlord and made it happen. And then I just saw, like, wow, like I'm renting this thing out for $2,200 and the mortgage is $1,600. Like, for like a new person, that's like, and for like a young 20-year-old, that's like pretty good beer money. So I just like decided, like, wow, I just got to keep doing this again and again and again.
So that was kind of it. You were traveling so much that you weren't even living at your own personal residence. You decided to rent it out, and that was kind of what opened your eyes to the power of investing in real estate.
Right, right. I mean, I was only home on probably Saturday evening, and I had to leave out Sunday morning. So I saw a lot of the guys working those jobs where you're traveling all the time, going to the airports all the time. And I saw, a lot of them, they probably had families. A lot of them were in the 40s or 50s. And I was like, man, like, it's kind of cool in the beginning when you're at that high frequent flyer status. And this is that time where that movie where the guy who had all the miles and
up in the air with
going
George Clooney.
Yeah, like there was some kind of badge of honor with being a frequent flyer and having all these miles to go wherever you wanted. And I'm like, it got old really quick. I mean, I was living on the road for about 2-3 years there, and it was just kind of dumb. I mean, like, I would be this young 20-year-old kid in first class, and it got old. And I was like, no, this is not the way I want to live. I want to get myself out of this rat race as soon as possible.
Wow. So you were George Clooney and up in the air, but you had a good job during the recession. So that seems like a positive there. Once you realized how you wanted to kind of get out of that lifestyle, real estate seemed like the best way to turn, huh?
Right, right. And unlike a lot of people, the job is tough, and you run into bad supervisors and managers, and it just didn't seem like the career path I had chosen, being an engineer, was quite what I wanted to. I mean, being an engineer, you're kind of far away from the people. I know a lot of doctors and that I talk to. At least at the end of the day, they're helping out people. But although there's a lot of paperwork, and the system is kind of changing for those folks today, but there's a lot of unfulfilled, hyper-paid professionals that I've met these last couple of years, trying to get into this real estate stuff, because what they're doing is just not fulfilling. I mean, it's basically just golden handcuffs.
They're golden handcuffs in that you're paid well, but it consumes your life.
Right. Unfortunately, what a lot of people do is they buy that huge primary residence, and they buy all these doodads around them that they're kind of stuck there.
Yeah, you see that all the time. And you had that going on. What are the steps you took then to start breaking those golden handcuffs?
Well, I mean, I kind of started out just like any other young professional. I bought that house, and I realized, like, wow, like when you buy that house, you not only lose this huge down payment that you could probably invest otherwhere, but you also have this bigger mortgage, and that kills your cash flow and your options to do different investments and do what you want. You go traveling and save. And by renting it out, I kind of flipped the script on the whole what would have happened, and it just changed my mentality. And that's why I tell a lot of my guys, like, don't worry about buying the wrong property. Everybody buys the wrong property in the first few, and just get started. And I think for me, it was the big mind shift of like, wow, look at the difference of rent I'm getting compared to the mortgage. And it's just like totally made me change my outlook on, I need to stop buying all this junk and just save it for down payments and more rental properties.
So you streamlined your thinking. Tell us about the first real rental property that you bought, where you intended to buy it as a rental.
Yeah, so after buying that first property, the second one, I saved up pretty quickly, maybe about a couple of years to save up for the next one. It was at that time I started reading all the books and podcasts, and I got this concept of the A class, B class, and C class rentals, which I'm sure you guys talk about a lot. So the first rental I had was the A class, and at the time, because it was 2010, 2011, it was a good pricing at that time. So I was able to
cash flow. A-class being like executive level type housing.
Right. Your white collar, more luxury. Definitely today's standards, it would not cash flow. I would say even a lot of B plus properties these days don't cash flow. a lot of these areas. And just know that I was in Seattle, Washington, so in terms of primary markets, you don't get much hotter market than that.
Very high prices in Seattle.
Yeah, today most of the sophisticated investors are going to the secondary markets where they can find cash flow too. I bought this B class or probably B plus duplex because I was like, I want a little more cash flow, and I was kind of coming on to the whole cash flow versus appreciation argument. And I was like, I need to create passive streams of income so I have the ability to leave my W-2 job. And the only way I'm going to do that is with cash flow. And that's what I decided was my goal, and that's what I started to do. And I bought that second rental in Seattle, and then I was going to load up and buy that third one. But then at that point was 2012 in Seattle, and the market was just going up and up and up. And nothing I was buying was cash flowing. And I was looking at these bad parts in Seattle and Everett, which is the next city up, and I was like, wow, like I don't know anything about this city, and like I'm not cash flowing, and like I thought that was the end for me in terms of investor. So I started to look elsewhere.
So how did you start looking elsewhere? Were you just looking at Craigslist ads in other communities, or how did you start identifying other areas and properties to invest in?
Well, I went on the internet and just kind of poked around and seeing what other investors were doing. I caught up a whole bunch of people that were kind of in my shoes, which is really hard to find. I mean, most guys on the internet, a lot of the more visible folks are active investors doing the whole flipping and wholesaling and doing that kind of stuff.
Because you had a full-time job, you needed more of a passive type investment.
Right. And I always, I give these free calls, people want to chat with me. And the first thing I kind of determine is, hey, what is your highest and best use? People have three types of attributes, either time, money, or knowledge/network. So I kind of quickly figure out like what is your what do you have a lot in, and what you don't have. And as a engineer, I had a lot of, I wouldn't say I didn't have a lot of money. I mean, engineers don't get paid that well, but I had some money for a down payment, and I had some decent knowledge at the time. In the beginning, I didn't have any, and I didn't have much time. So that equation equates to, turnkey rentals is a good way of starting. And so that's what I did. And I looked into several markets, and at that time, I mean, I just got overwhelmed by the amount of choices. But, I just went on and bought that first one because I just looked at the consequences. I mean, if I didn't buy one, I didn't pick a market, then I would be stuck with non-cash flow, and that would not be acceptable.
Analysis paralysis was not an option.
Right. And sometimes identifying the fact that you have no other best option or the baton of a negotiation, the best alternative, is the best way to just move things forward. Just get it going.
So where and what did you buy, and what did the numbers look like?
So I settled on Birmingham, Alabama, and at the time, that was 2012, Atlanta, Birmingham, and Memphis were pretty hot at that time. I think Atlanta, people, the hedge funds were going in and buying a lot of these single-family homes. You hear Memphis all the time on, podcast advertisements and websites. So I don't know. I just wanted to be a little different, and I just kind of went to Birmingham, and it's kind of been one of the the better markets for me personally that's kind of panned out. But at the time I bought this property for about 60 or 70,000, and it rented for the 1% roll, and I cash flowed, and it's been a pretty solid rental. And for me, that was proof of concept. After I had that one going and stabilized, and I kind of got the understanding of being an out-of-state investor and kind of playing that role, managing the property management, I did two 1031s exchanges, and I sold both of those Seattle properties for $9 out-of-state rentals in Atlanta, Birmingham, and Indianapolis.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com. So you sold 2 properties in Seattle, which I'd imagine by that point had appreciated considerably.
Right. But they still went up. I think I sold those maybe a few years ago, and they've been going up and up and up. But
yeah, I'm sure they're still going up at this point. And you 1031, meaning that you were able to just transfer the profit into these 9 other properties without having to pay any tax on that profit.
Right. I mean, you kick the can down the road on those 1031s, and I'm personally not a very good fan of them. I think they get prescribed as the solution a little bit too much. I mean, in my opinion, if you're a working professional that you're going to graduate into more sophisticated syndications that are more scalable, you should think twice about 1031, because now I'm kind of kicking myself that I shouldn't have done it, because now I'm trying to get it myself into syndications 100%, and I've got to pay the taxes.
But you've deferred those taxes till you sell them, right? I mean, I'm not sure I understand what you're, because
I've deferred the taxes.
If you had not 1031 exchanged your profit from the Seattle properties, would you have been able to afford 9 properties from the profits?
Probably. I might have not afford to buy 9, but I would afford 8 of them. Mm-hmm. But also, I mean, the 1031, yeah, it gets me a little bit more firepower to go after more properties initially, but I'm gonna have to pay the taxes back at some point. But here's my thing against the 1031. The 1031, you have this pretty strict timeline, and you've got, it's just so tricky to pull off, and it'll make you go crazy. But inherently, it's a flawed. You're going to put yourself in a pretty bad position as a buyer and a seller. So when you're selling the properties, you've got to go through a custodian and do all this paperwork, which is fine. But when you're lining up to buy the next properties, you can't be a picky buyer. You've got to kind of just pick up whatever you get. And at that time when I was buying these 9 properties, I mean, I wasn't a very sophisticated buyer. I was buying, a lot of it was turnkey. But today, if you're going to be buying warm deals or good deals, I mean, you're not going to be able to line up these two shooting stars, make the sale happen on your property and the purchase of a good deal. Yeah. I just don't think it's possible.
I would agree with that. I mean, the timing is a very tricky thing. I mean, if I had to identify in 45 days, what do you have, 45 days to identify?
Right, that's the hard one.
I don't know how I do it.
Is longer, but the 45 days, that's the killer.
Yeah. So okay, yeah, I see your point there. So, but you did the 1031. You have 9. You picked up 9 properties. How did those turn out for you?
It's at that point I hit the economies of scale, and then I think in 2016, 3 of the 10 properties lost money, but I still hit the pro forma numbers that I set out to get, at least a couple $100 of cash flow per month per property. They performed as they should. I mean, at that time, the pricing was a little better, and it's a lot harder to do it these days in their seller's market, especially with, non-value add turnkey. But yeah, a lot of experiences learned, and, move on to bigger and better things nowadays. But yeah, that's a great way to get started.
So okay, so yeah, because really, now you've got 9 properties. You're cash flowing a couple $100 a month from each property, but that's not enough to quit your job. I mean, that's setting you up for long-term success, but that's a long-term success. So where does your thinking go at this point? It's you somehow made the leap from 9 properties out of state to how many properties do you have now, or units?
626.
626. So how did your thinking evolve from that point forward, and what action did you take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think exactly what you said. I mean, you realize you've got these cash flow goals, and I'm pretty frugal. Like, I'm just trying to shoot for $5,000 or $10,000 these days, or $10,000 is a good amount, I think. And but to get that, just do the math. 10,000 a month divided by $200. I mean, that's a lot of houses, right?
A lot of houses, yeah. So you're saying that if you have passive income of 10,000 a month, that would be kind of your able to quit your job number.
Well, I mean, that's kind of I think what it is for a lot of people, that 5-digit mark per month.
Yeah, that's a good number to shoot for.
Yeah, and if you just do the math, I mean, it's just not going to happen with these single-family homes, and which is contrary to what you hear a lot from the mom and pop investors and a lot of the people trying to sell you all these single-family homes. And then at that time, I started to network with higher-level investors, and this is exactly what they were saying too. And I'm like, well, shoot, like, what do we do then? And then, I just, again, it was a pivot point, and I just started to learn about what all these other guys were doing. A lot of them, they do commercial, multifamily, they go into all these other investments. And at that point, it's choose your own adventure again. And for me, it was multifamily. And one of the big things was the non-recourse loans that were available for apartment buildings. And that was what really appealed to me and what ultimately made me choose my path down this.
Yeah, and explain that, the non-recourse loans for apartment buildings. Why was that important to you?
Yeah, so recourse loans are what most loans are. Like, you get a Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac loan on a single family home. You put down your down payment, and if the property goes underwater or something happens, and you've always got to have to pay that back. It's a recourse loan. They can come back and get you. And in 2008, those loans, I mean, just because there were so many people going underwater, there were bailouts, but there was potential for the banks to come after the folks, the investors. So what a non-recourse loan is, you put the down payment in, and as long as there's no foul play, or they call it the bad boy clause, you can just walk away, hand back the keys, and they're not going to come after you for the whole amount, which is great when you're buying like a $5 million apartment building. They're not going to come back with you for the rest. So it makes syndicating with other investors a little safer, and it's just a better way of playing. Unfortunately, the only way that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac will loan on these and give these non-recourse loans is if the property is stabilized, meaning it's 85 to 90% occupied or more. It's a good stabilized cash flow property at that time. And these aren't these huge value add, the 50% occupied type of properties. These are good decent assets that they're lending on. And at that time, I was like, well, why is the government subsidizing these rich syndicators and investors? But it just makes sense when you're thinking that the government, this country needs more workforce housing, and this is the way they're stimulating the economy or stimulating the sector to get investors into this. And it's good. And just like how I followed the single family homes, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, I followed into multifamily, where I looked where the government was infusing money into.
You're right. The government understands that need for workforce housing, and we're the ones providing it, us and different levels of investors all across the board. If Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac weren't backing these loans, would housing be as good and safe as it is today? Probably not.
Yeah, probably not. But, it's the way, it's probably the people are very political, but I agree, putting money into this sector for working Americans and kind of subsidizing housing for for them, even buy through investors, I mean, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. So was it around that point when you had the 9 properties that you said, you know what, I need to get bigger, I need to go commercial and start syndicating? Or did that take a little bit longer to get to that point?
It took about a couple years. I mean, I got up to double digits in single family homes, and then probably about earlier in 2016, I started doing my website and podcast because, people were asking me all these questions all the time. And at that time, I was learning multifamily, which is a totally different shift and different game being played there. And it was a little embarrassing the last couple of years. I didn't buy any properties. I had this podcast, but I wasn't doing anything. So I was kind of getting imposter syndrome over there a little bit. But yeah, in the last few months, I mean, we've been kind of going gangbusters. But it was a lot of work and a lot of networking instead of deal finding. I find it's more about the people in the multifamily.
Yeah, it's funny because that's kind of been my experience too. There was a good 2-3 years where I really hadn't done a deal. I started this podcast, and just doing the podcast helps you network with people, and somehow that opens the door to more deals coming along. Because now I've got multiple deals that I've been doing in the past 5 months here.
Right. The multifamily and just commercial in general is sort of an unfair game. I mean, it's hard to get started because you call a broker up, and it's funny, in multifamily, the brokers actually do their job as opposed to the agents in the single family world. The brokers are actually calling the sellers and getting the listings. So you've got to get in front of the brokers with the deals. And you're not going to do that if you haven't closed a property. So it's a chicken and egg thing. It's very difficult to navigate.
Yeah, so talk about getting into your first syndication in commercial property. What was it, and how did you manage to get it done?
So, the first one is I was just looking to build my resume. So like I said, when I go to a broker, I can say I've closed. I'm not just a newbie. And those guys get a lot of just guys calling them on LoopNet or just, randomly phone calling them that like they play a lot of qualifying, and they ask, what's your net worth, what's your previous experience, what's your liquidity, and they're just trying to feel you out as a buyer because their time is very valuable. So it's kind of like a chess game, and the way I played it is I just jumped on as a limited partner, and then I started to work my way up into the general partnership role. To build my resume, and that's kind of how the game is played. You got to start somewhere.
What was the first large commercial property that you took down?
It was a couple smaller units. It was 170 units altogether, but that was Oklahoma City, and that was it was a Class C property. I think most of these properties that a lot of the folks that are the similar investors go after are the Class C property that's stabilized, like I mentioned, to get that non-recourse loan, but it also has that value add component, and it's cash flowing from the first year, so it's working. It's usually you're buying it because it's a stabilized asset, but then there's some kind of issue there, and there's always some kind of story. And in that first one, the story was it was a mom and pop investor, and they just didn't have the systems in place. They just, a lot of the mom and pop investors that are retiring these days, they just don't know how to use Google. They don't know how to really figure things out and, use more sophisticated systems to, and the best practices. And they're just not networked, I think, is the big thing. They don't know what all the cool kids in investing are using. In terms of people, property management, or even like I said, the internet systems,
or even in terms of marketing.
Right. I mean, it's always a changing world, and these guys, these mom and pop investors that step up from duplexes, quads, 16 plexes, 32s, the 50 units. I mean, they're out there, and it's a good place to start. I mean, you would think that these guys would just go to a broker and sell it for the highest price, but sometimes they don't, and sometimes they just don't know what the property is worth.
So can you talk about numbers on that? It sounds like it was a portfolio of different size properties, but can you talk about numbers on that and how you were able to take it down, like how much money you raised and the deal you put together?
Yeah, so I mean that one is just like any other. It's 50 grand a unit is kind of the level. Going in, looking at the individual rents, and this is kind of taking from single family investing mindset. You know, when single family homes, you look at it from a rent to value standpoint. You're looking for at least that 1% rent to value ratio. But multifamily is a little different. It's ran a little bit more professionally. You're not, you know, I'm not saying that you would, but like single family homes, you kind of fix things with duct tape and, bubble gum in a way. But you can't do that with multifamily. You have to run it like legit business. So your expenses are going to be a lot higher, probably about, $3,000 or $4,000 per unit, depending on the size of the building. But, on multifamily, usually about 1.5 rent to value ratio is a good starting point. And, for that property, there was a potential for about $100 of rent increases on that one. So, stabilize, check. And then the second check box is there's that ability to raise the rents. And that can be verified by comps, going around and checking up very similar rental properties, apartments, and then going in and, getting boots in the ground and even going in and kind of playing yourself as a potential tenant and seeing what are the other rental rates in the area.
So you were able to see that there was about $100 a unit in upside on rents there. Have you been able to achieve that?
No, that one's still in the process. These things usually take about 5 years. So you go in, you do the rehab. This one, for some reason, didn't really have any rehab. I mean, normally a light to medium rehab is going to be about $4,000 a unit, but this one in particular didn't really have any of that. I think we used like about $1,000 per unit on that one. So it's very unusual for a C-class property to be like that. But hey, that's what made it such a deal.
Yeah, and it sounds like you acquired this within the past year. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's still pretty fresh.
So you don't really see a lot of this upside until people move out. You turn the unit, you put the money into fixing up the unit, bump those rents up. Are you seeing that increase in rent on the new units you're bringing to the market?
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of times when you buy this stuff, you want to see some proof of concept. Just like, when I went to Birmingham, I tried one. That's proof of concept. But, you want the old landlord or the seller to bump rents on, do the upgrades on maybe about 10 or 25% of the units to get proof of concept, so you can take the other 75% or you always want to leave some meat on the bone too for the next guy. But, that's the proof of concept.
Mm-hmm. How did you fund this deal?
So this deal was syndicated with private investors. So the way syndications work, the analogy that's used is like an airplane. So in the cockpit are all the general partners and the key principals who find the deal, they sign on the loan, they find the lender, they operate the deal, they find all the investors, they pretty much do everything so that the passive investors can come in and coach and just sit back and go to sleep and collect their checks. So it's a pretty good arrangement. People, I think investors, most investors start up as operators where they're doing their own single family homes. But at some point, people have got to decide if they're going to be the lead investor and make this a job, or if they're just going to come on coach and go to sleep and collect their checks as a limited partner.
How much did you raise?
I raised personally a few $100,000 on that one. So then again, that was kind of a proof of concept, as I've been kind of building my investor list and people, I analyze the deal alongside others, and I invest alongside with my investors. And that one was kind of the proof of concept for me to kind of start expanding my syndication business, as bringing my audience along on deals and helping folks in that facet.
Yeah. So is that what? So what is, as far as syndicating and finding these deals, what is your specialty? What is it that you're best at?
I think my ability is to communicate deals in such a way that it's not just. I mean, I'm not a sales guy. I'm just an engineer, and I'm just going to tell you the what I think about the deal, and even if that's the bad stuff. I mean, I started to realize that I'm going to be doing this for quite a while, and what I don't want happening is to mislead somebody, and then they come to Hawaii and they find me and they kick my butt, right? Like, no, I'm gonna tell you what I think about this deal, and what I've heard the other day is, a good way of communicating is, hey, these are the 3 ways this deal is gonna fail. If you're okay with it, then come on board. But if you're not okay, then you probably shouldn't be investing.
Well, so the 3 ways a deal could fail. What is it different for every deal, or is it
right?
Similar?
I mean, some properties like that last one I did. The loan was a 7-year note, which is these days the 10-year is sort of the gold standard. The premise there is that if we have a correction in the economy, that note length can extend you to at least a point where you can sell in not the trough of the.
You can ride out the turbulence and get to the other side with a 10-year note.
Right. So the general sentiment these days is like a 5-year note. That's definitely what you don't want to be touching. And that's just a little bit too short.
Yeah, and in the commercial world, a lot of banks like to stick to 5 years because they want to. It seems to me they want to realize when interest rates go up, they want to realize that increase in interest rates. But if you can get a 10-year on a commercial loan or better, then that's something you should seriously consider.
Yeah, I think that first one that we're talking about, that was a 10-year note, 4.22%, and 3 years interest only. And yeah, that was a pretty phenomenal rate.
Yeah, was that a Fannie Mae or what
that one is that one was a Freddie Mac loan.
Freddie Mac, okay. Yeah, that 3 years interest only to start with, that really boosts your cash flow in those first 3 years and really helps you kind of get over that hump of some of the unexpected expenses you might find when you take over a property like that.
Right. I think unfortunately, it's good and bad. Sometimes if your reposition goes well and you want to cash out in 3 years, you've got to pay back. There's a little bit of a penalty that go along with some of these loans when that happens. But I think that getting started, the lending environment for these multifamilies is just way more complex than single family homes. Yeah. In single family homes, you can kind of explain it in one podcast, and people kind of get it. They get the game, and it kind of it changes, but they kind of understand, okay, these 2 levers move. But multifamilies, man, you really got to rely on your broker.
Yeah, and having a good broker really helps because there's so many different types of lenders in the commercial world. I mean, insurance, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, small, banks, private lenders. So it really helps to know a good broker who can hold your hand and walk you through it.
Right.
So what kind of returns? I know you've done some well, actually, maybe I'm assuming here. Have you done other syndications since then?
No, I'm just letting these couple ride out. I've been kind of looking into investments that are outside of real estate, but again, I'm kind of going through that stage where I'm just learning now, and it might take a while to actually put something out. But a lot of my investors, they've been the last deal, they wanted more cash flow. They didn't want that bigger total return. They were more concerned about stability, and everybody knows that where we are in the market cycle, and a lot of folks have been asking for investments outside of real estate that are not real estate, not apartment complex, single family, or anything like that, but totally outside of the sector. I mean, we're not talking Bitcoin here, but direct investing in businesses that are proven, I think, are what people are looking for.
So are you looking at some of that then?
I am. I mean, things like life settlements or, farmland are kind of things that I'm keying in on. Things that won't be affected by any correction, I think.
So do you feel that there's a real estate bubble and that prices may have reached their top?
I think there is. The reason I think you and I do multifamily is, we're doing it for that value add component. So it'll still be fine. It's just, I don't know. I just think that a lot of investors I meet, they have a portion of their portfolio and not non-real estate stuff. And I just think that I just want to expand that avenue. And, I think you can kind of get a sense. I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm going to, trying to learn it. And I think, like in anything, when you kind of become cultish about one type of investment, just like how I was a little while about turnkey rentals and single family homes, you can kind of get blindsided by an event, or, you can kind of lose sight of, even better investments.
Yeah. I tend to agree. I think multifamily and apartments is a great way to invest. But I have, I mentioned that I haven't done a deal in multifamily or apartments for 2 to 3 years now. And that's just because I can't find anything in the area that I'm comfortable in, which is the West Michigan area here, that it has the kind of yield that would get my investors excited.
Right. I mean, the cool thing now is that there's a lot of money on the sidelines. I mean, people just have a lot of cash on their hands.
Yeah.
So it's, as a syndicator, this is the time to be raising money for deals and maybe putting it into different deals. I mean, it's like always be changing your business, right? Trying to decide, well, is my business real estate, or is my business trying to get my investors the best, safest return that they can get at this time?
As a syndicator, I think that's what it is, getting them the best, safest return. Right. And everything's cyclical. So the apartment market, it's gone up to a point where I just don't think it makes sense. So I'm kind of in the same boat as you. Is, well, what other investments out there are kind of at the beginning of that ramp up, where if you can get in now, like some people did in 2008, 2009 with apartments, you could really ride out and see a nice profit and a nice return for your investors.
All right. I think I see it the same way as, we talk about that term of emerging market, when you're investing in Los Angeles, and then you shift your money into Michigan, for example, like that's a way of going into, a different emerging market. And I see it the same way. Maybe, Dallas has been the emerging market of the last few years. Maybe you take some money out of Dallas and put it into, some kind of a life settlement thing, or, non-performing notes, for example. I mean, but I think at the end of the day, I still love multifamily apartments, because just look at the demographics. I mean, the good thing about America is that our population is growing, and that's apartment is just going to be in the forefront of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you look at the demographic trends, apartments, rental housing, it's going to be strong for a long time, because there's just not enough housing coming online to meet the demand that's going to be there. So, there's definitely that. You mentioned, what did you call them? Life settlements?
Yeah, life settlements.
What is that?
It's something that Warren Buffett and those guys invest in a lot, and what a lot of the sophisticated investors invest in. So it's purchasing. It's sort of like mortgage investing, but instead of investing in a mortgage note, you're investing in a guy's life insurance policy. So just think of, somebody going to the doctor and getting that bad news that their illness, they're going to, probably die in the next few years. That they may want to just take the money and, go take their family to Disneyland or enjoy their last few years. And you as an investor can come along and sort of bail them out and give them that cash to do what they want. And it's like, it kind of is a morbid investment, but you're kind of helping them out, because you're giving them what they want
while they're still alive.
Right, but not a lot of people play around in the space, and it's when not a lot of people do it, there's opportunity, right?
Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
and not many things are guaranteed, right, other than taxes and death. So
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So Lane, you're in Hawaii now. What caused you to move from Seattle to Hawaii?
for me, it's more quality of life. I grew up here, and it was always not really a possibility to come back and move here, because Hawaii is about 10% more expensive than the Bay Area, but like the job pay is like 30% less. So financially speaking, it was just not really a possibility until I played this real estate, and now I'm making it possible, and I can kind of live the dream. And I've kind of been playing around with my quality of life in different ways, trying to make today a little better than, as opposed to just keeping my money and saving it till I can finally retire. I've been trying to make changes in my quality of life, kind of keeping the end in mind, and trying to build that one step at a time. So this is kind of one way I've done it.
And how are you identifying opportunities then? Are you finding any in Hawaii, or are you finding them in other areas?
Well, yeah, there's nothing in Hawaii here. There's too many foreign investors. It's just like Seattle or the West Coast. So I mean, it's the same thing like living in Seattle. I mean, got to get on the plane if you're going to be a sophisticated investor who's in the know.
So are you actually getting on the plane and going to those emerging markets to find new opportunities, or are you working with other investors who may be helping you find those and identify those opportunities?
Yeah, so I'm kind of doing both these days. I mean, getting boots on the ground, I mean, I'm still trying to learn too. So going to seminars, training, and actually going on doing due diligence on properties, I'm still doing that. But at this point, I mean, the way higher level investors work is it's sort of a web of connections, and if someone's got a deal, I'm gonna go take a look at it too and see if I like it, and see if I want to invest alongside of it too.
So you're still pretty hands-on then.
Right.
And as we wrap it up, what advice do you have for our listeners?
Yeah, I think we kind of went on the tangent at the end there. And, I just want to kind of rein things back, because, that's been a problem of mine. I get shiny object syndrome. I go into this and then go into that. And I think as investors, and especially beginning ones, I mean, get back to the fundamentals. I always think that, the multifamily versus single family route, the multifamily just by far more pros than cons in terms of, what you should do. But the single family is a prerequisite to that. I still think that you should start off with a single family home and get that started. That's sort of the development league before you get into the major leagues. And, you just got to pick something, whether that it's assisted living facilities, gas stations, apartments. You got to pick something, and you got to go all into it. And until you've kind of built your network where you can go into other things and leverage the expertise of others, you got to start out with, making your own portfolio at least to a decent size where you have that passive cash flow to kind of do what you want for the most part. So you're not worried about putting food at the table. You're not worried about, if this deal goes bad, then it craters your whole ability to invest in the future. So I think we can kind of get ahead of ourselves, and I'm still a newer investor, so I still have that pretty close in my forefront of my mind that a lot of folks, they get this is the way people get hung up and they don't get started. Just get started, just buy something, because even though it won't be the greatest investment, it'll get you started. And I reread Kiyosaki's book the other day, and something I picked up was it's not about investing, it's more about learning. And that kind of, a lot of people will say that it's a seller's market right now, I'm just going to sit it out until the next one. I'm like, no, that's a completely wrong mindset. You're missing out on the biggest thing. It's about learning now.
It's very important to get that ball rolling, and I agree. I started off with some single families out of state, And even though I may have been, when all is said and done, maybe I broke even if I'm lucky, it was still a great way to get started and get my feet wet and help solidify my view of what the next step is that I needed to take.
All right.
So Lane, I want to thank you for taking the time to be on the show, and really appreciate everything you had to say about starting in single family and realizing, commercial, multifamily, and syndication would probably help accelerate your goal of creating that passive income. Also, you have a website and a podcast, so why don't you tell us about that real quick?
Yeah, the website is simplepassivecashflow.com. I've kind of made it a little journal of what I've been doing the last couple of years, and people have been following along, and kind of there's been some cries over me going to multifamily and totally get rid of the single families. But yeah, I also have a podcast found on iTunes and Google Play, and I got people want to download all the goodies I have in my Google Drive. Some spreadsheets and different stuff like that. They can come to the website, just sign up for the email newsletter, and I get access to that for the secret link to that. And my email is Lane at Simple Passive Cashflow, and always looking to connect with folks.
Great. Well, Lane, thanks so much.
Thanks, Brian.
This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.